The city was alive with its usual rhythm, horns blaring, headlights slicing through the dusk, pedestrians weaving between cars with hurried steps. Among the restless movement, a single yellow taxi sat parked at the corner, its engine purring softly as though waiting for a secret to unfold. Behind the wheel sat Edward Blake, a man the city knew by name but never by face. He was the architect of skylines, the owner of corporations, the millionaire who never seemed to stop building, buying, and conquering. To the world, he was untouchable. But tonight, he wasn't Edward Blake, the titan. He was just a father, hidden beneath the disguise of a taxi driver, and trembling with the weight of what he hoped to discover. He adjusted the cap on his head, tilting it lower, the fabric brushing against his temples. His hands, usually steady when signing million-dollar deals, trembled against the steering wheel. He had spent his life mastering control over numbers, over time, over people. Yet, the thought of hearing his daughter's unfiltered truth left him feeling smaller than he'd ever been. Sophia was only 10, but already she carried herself with a maturity that unsettled him. Edward knew it wasn't because she wanted to grow up fast, it was because she had to. She had filled the spaces he had left empty. He remembered her voice over the phone on birthdays he'd missed, polite, soft, rehearsed, as though she didn't dare to sound disappointed. He remembered the way she waved goodbye through the window when his car sped away to yet another meeting. And tonight, under the disguise of an ordinary cab driver, he would learn what those silences and waves had truly meant. As the school bell rang and children poured out with laughter and chatter, Edward gripped the steering wheel tighter. His heart pounded with every child that passed, knowing one of them was his entire world. He wasn't here to perform, or to impress. He was here to listen to the one voice that mattered most. The schoolyard overflowed with life. Parents gathered at the gate, calling out names, holding hands, tucking scarves against the early evening chill. Children darted around, their backpacks bouncing, their voices rising in a carefree chorus. Edward's eyes scanned every face, every small figure that emerged, until he spotted her. Sophia. Her ponytail swayed with each careful step, the straps of her backpack tugging at her small shoulders. She didn't rush out like the other kids. Instead, she walked with a certain hesitance, like she was already preparing for the quiet house that awaited her. She glanced at the row of waiting cars, scanning for the familiar black sedan that always came for her. But tonight, there was no sleek car, no uniformed driver. Only Edward, hiding behind the wheel of a scuffed taxi, cap pulled low, pretending to be a stranger. Edward tapped the horn gently, one soft note. Sophia paused, her brow furrowing as she looked at the yellow cab. For a moment, she seemed uncertain, even cautious. Then, with a small shift of her shoulders, she stepped closer. Edward's pulse raced. Would she recognize him already? Would she sense something beneath the disguise? The door handle clicked, and she slid into the back seat. The vinyl gave a faint squeak under her weight, and her backpack pressed tightly against her knees. She didn't look at him right away. Instead, her eyes wandered across the faded interior, the dangling pine tree air freshener, the worn stitching on the seats, the dull glow of the meter. Where to? Edward asked, his voice deliberately gruff, softened with the gravel he had practiced in the mirror. Home, she replied simply, her tone automatic, as though she'd said the same words countless times before. Edward shifted the gear, pulling slowly into the stream of traffic. The city stretched out before them, glowing with the golden edge of sunset. For a while, neither spoke. The silence wasn't hostile, but heavy, filled with things unsaid. The cab rolled down the avenue, its engine humming steadily as the world outside blurred past, corner shops with neon signs, a grocery store unloading crates of oranges, children on bicycles weaving through traffic with laughter trailing behind them. Edward kept his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, his posture rigid, but his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again and again. There she was, his daughter, sitting quietly, her small fingers tugging at the zipper of her backpack. He noticed the detail that pierced him most, a stuffed rabbit poking from the back, its ears frayed and one eye hanging loose. She smoothed it with her thumb gently, as though comforting the toy, or perhaps herself. You like parks? Edward asked, his voice carefully casual. Sophia shrugged, not looking up. Sometimes. But I don't go much. The answer was flat, not resentful, but practiced, like she'd given it many times before. Edward felt something sink in his chest. He wanted to ask more, but before he could, two women crossed the street in front of the cab. Their voices floated in through the slightly cracked window. Her dad's never around. Always traveling, one whispered. Money can't hug you good night, the other replied, her words sharp enough to sting. Edward's throat tightened. He glanced at Sophia in the mirror. Her eyes had fallen to the floor mat, her shoulders drawing inward, as if she wanted to disappear. The silence stretched again, louder this time, pressing against Edward's chest. He swallowed hard. Long day at school, he tried, his tone softer. Just regular, she answered, her voice light but distant. He waited, gave her space, and then asked carefully, You've got friends waiting for you. This time she looked up, her gaze meeting his reflection in the mirror for the briefest moment. Her eyes were older than her years, carrying a weight no 10-year-old should bear. Not really, she said. Everyone's busy with their families. I just go home. The what? The cab rattled over a pothole, jolting them both slightly. Sophia clutched her backpack tighter, pulling it closer to her chest as though it could shield her from the emptiness of the ride. Edward noticed. He noticed everything tonight, things he had overlooked for years. The way she pressed her lips together when silence grew too heavy. The way her small shoulders curled inwards, as though trying to make herself invisible. He cleared his throat, steadying his voice. If you could change one thing, just one, what would it be? For a long moment, there was no answer. The traffic light flicked from green to yellow, and the cab rolled slowly forward. Outside, store signs glowed in pinks and blues, and the scent of roasted chestnuts wafted from a street cart. Inside, the air thickened with the weight of waiting. Edward glanced in the rearview mirror. Sophia was staring out the window, her forehead leaning against the cool glass. He thought maybe she wouldn't answer. Maybe she had already learned not to share what hurt. But then, so softly he almost missed it, she spoke. I changed how much I see my dad. The words struck him like a stone shattering glass. No bitterness. No anger. Just plain truth. Edward blinked hard, his grip on the steering wheel tightening until his knuckles turned pale. He felt every boardroom victory turn hollow in an instant, every empire he had built crumbling beneath the weight of his daughter's quiet confession. He forced himself to keep driving, headlights washing over brick walls and passing cars. His chest burned. His throat felt raw. And yet, he stayed silent. This moment wasn't about defending himself or offering excuses. It was about hearing the truth from the one voice that mattered more than any in the world. Sophia didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the passing blur of neon lights and corner shops, her small hand smoothing the rabbit's ear again and again. It was a ritual of comfort, one she had likely perfect. The city seemed to dim around him. Every honk, every flash of neon, every passing shadow blurred into the background, drowned out by the echo of her words. I changed how much I see my dad. They replayed in his mind, heavier each time, pressing into him like a weight he could not escape. Edward's jaw tightened, but his disguise kept him silent. He wasn't here to defend himself. He was here to finally understand. Sophia shifted in the back seat, letting out a sigh that sounded far too weary for a child. You know what's funny, she said suddenly, her voice small, almost uncertain. Edward's heart leapt. What's that? He asked, careful to keep his tone steady, casual, like any driver making polite conversation. People think it's amazing having a dad who's rich, she whispered, rubbing the frayed edge of her sleeve between two fingers. They say I must get whatever I want. But they don't get it. I'd trade all of it. Every toy, every trip, every gift, for him just being home. The words struck with blunt force, leaving Edward's chest hollow. His grip on the wheel tightened until the leather creaked beneath his fingers. He had thought the cars, the private tutors, the vacations, the endless gifts were enough to prove his love. But here she was, unraveling the truth with a child's honesty. She gave a shaky laugh, one that didn't belong to her age. Sometimes when other kids talk about their dads, about going to the park, or watching movies, or just eating dinner together, I pretend. I make up stories so they don't think I'm different. Her voice faltered, but she pushed on. I even told them once I had two dads. One real, one imaginary. The imaginary one always shows up. Edward's throat closed. His vision blurred with tears he couldn't blink away fast enough. The wheel wavered in his hands, and he guided the cab gently toward the curb, easing it to a stop. He couldn't drive another block carrying the weight of her words. The cab idled quietly at the curb, its soft hum the only sound in the thick silence between them. Edward's chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath a struggle against the tide of emotions crashing inside him. His daughter's confession replayed again and again, an imaginary dad who always shows up. Sophia shifted in the back seat, her eyes dropping to her lap. She rubbed the rabbit's ear with her thumb, her voice barely above a whisper. Sorry. I talk too much. Edward swallowed hard. His disguise felt heavier than the suit he wore to board meetings, heavier than the weight of entire skyscrapers balanced on his name. He wanted to throw it off, to tell her everything, but he forced himself to wait, to hold the silence just a moment longer. No, he said finally, his voice low, breaking slightly despite his efforts. You didn't talk too much. You said what needed to be heard. Her eyes flicked up, startled by the gentleness in his tone. For a brief second, she studied him in the mirror, as though she sensed something familiar beneath the cap and shadow. Edward turned slightly in his seat, the disguise slipping with emotion. His eyes burned, wet with the tears he had held back for years. When their gazes locked, the recognition dawned in her expression instantly. Dad, she whispered, her voice trembling. The word broke him. He nodded, unable to hide any longer. His chest heaved as tears spilled freely down his cheeks. It's me, sweetheart. I just wanted to hear you, really hear you. Without the suit. Without the walls I've been hiding behind. For a moment, Sophia sat frozen, her small hands clutching the rabbit tighter. Then, slowly, she leaned forward, reaching across the seat with both hands. Edward's trembling hand met hers halfway, their fingers entwining in a fragile, desperate grip. The world outside kept moving, cars rushing past, people hurrying along the sidewalk, but inside the cab, time seemed to stop. There was only a father and his daughter, B. Edward bowed his head, his tears falling onto his sleeve, staining the fabric darker with each drop. For decades he had stood in boardrooms, his voice steady, his presence commanding. He had faced competitors, sealed impossible deals, and stared down crises that could shake entire empires. Yet here, in the front seat of a dented taxi, he felt utterly undone. Sophia's small hands held his as though anchoring him to something real. Her touch was warm, steady, unafraid, even as her wide eyes shimmered with uncertainty. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him, her expression hovering between relief and hurt, as though she wasn't sure whether to believe this was a beginning or another fleeting promise. I didn't mean to make you sad, she said gently, her voice cautious. Edward lifted his head, his face raw with emotion, stripped of all the composure he had mastered for years. You didn't make me sad, he whispered, his voice breaking again. You made me see. Really see. For the first time in too long. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of honesty, of love that had been buried beneath distance and excuses. Edward squeezed her hands tighter, as though trying to pour all the words he hadn't said into that single touch. With a shaky breath, he pulled her into the front seat beside him. She climbed awkwardly over the gearshift, her backpack snagging on the handbrake, and let out a small laugh when she nearly tumbled. The sound was soft, but it pierced him. It was real, unguarded, the kind of laugh he had almost forgotten. When she settled against him, Edward wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, pressing her head against his chest. He inhaled the faint scent of crayons and pencil lead in her hair, felt the steady beat of her heart syncing with his own. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about contracts or meetings. He wasn't counting minutes. He was simply holding his daughter, and the simplicity of it nearly broke him all over. Outside the cab, the city pulsed on, unaware of the fragile reunion unfolding within. Two pedestrians slowed as they passed, glancing through the window at the sight of a man in tears clutching a child against his chest. One whispered, "Isn't that Blake?" The other shook their head, muttering, "Never thought I'd see him like that." Their footsteps faded, but their words lingered in Edward's ears. He didn't care. For once in his life, public perception meant nothing. The empire he had built, the reputation he had guarded, the endless climb for more, all of it shrank beside the warmth of his daughter's cheek against his shirt. He pulled back slightly, cupping Sophia's face in his hands. His thumbs brushed away the faint wetness beneath her eyes. "No more empty promises," he said, his voice steady now, not from power but from resolve. "From now on, I'm showing up. Every game, every recital, every bedtime story I missed, I'll be there. You're my everything, Sophia. And I'm sorry it took me this long to see it." Sophia studied him closely, her young eyes sharp with caution, as if weighing whether to trust his words. For years, she had learned not to rely on promises, they had been made too easily, broken too often. But something in his face, raw and unguarded, seemed different. Slowly, she smiled. Small at first, then growing, warming the cab with a light no chandelier in his penthouse could ever match. "That's all I wanted, Dad," she whispered. "Just you." Edward pressed his forehead gently against hers, sealing his vow not with contracts or signatures, but with the unspoken bond of presence. He restarted the cab, pulling back into the flow of traffic. His grip on the wheel felt different, lighter, steadier. Not as a driver in disguise. Not as a businessman chasing the next victory. But as a father, finally present in the one role that truly mattered. For the first time in years, Edward Blake wasn't driving toward a house. He was driving home. The cab moved steadily through the veins of the city, headlights washing over rows of brick buildings, street vendors packing up their carts, and children playing their last games before the evening swallowed the sidewalks. Edward's eyes stayed on the road, but his thoughts were with the girl sitting beside him, her small hand resting on his sleeve. Sophia leaned her forehead against the window, drawing invisible shapes in the glass with her finger. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, almost to herself, she whispered, "It feels different sitting up here with you." Edward glanced at her, his heart swelling and breaking all at once. "Different how?" She shrugged, her eyes still on the passing blur outside. "Like I'm not alone. Like you actually see me." Her words cut deeper than any criticism, yet they carried a fragile hope. Edward swallowed the lump in his throat. "I do see you, Sophia. I've just been blind for too long." The cab slowed at a red light. Around them, families hurried across the crosswalk, parents with their children's hands clasped firmly, laughter echoing between them. Edward watched them closely, the longing in Sophia's gaze reflecting against the glass. For years, he had told himself his work was for her, that every deal, every skyscraper, every dollar built a better future. But watching her now, he realized the future had been waiting every evening at the dinner table, every morning before school, every small moment he had missed. The light turned green, and the cab rolled forward again. Sophia turned to him suddenly, her voice firmer this time. "Do you promise, Dad, that it won't be like before?" Edward met her eyes, his own still wet but unwavering. "I promise, sweetheart. This time, I'll prove it not with words, but with days. With being there." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and for the first time that night, she leaned against him without hesitation. The weight of her small frame pressed into his arm, and Edward realized it was. The cab wound its way through quieter streets now, where tree branches arched overhead and their leaves whispered in the evening breeze. The chaos of the city faded behind them, replaced by a softer rhythm, street lamps flickering awake, the faint bark of a dog, the rustle of footsteps on sidewalks. Inside the cab, father and daughter sat cocooned in a fragile stillness that neither wanted to break. Edward finally spoke, his voice low, careful. "You know, when I was your age, I used to think my father was larger than life. He worked hard too, but he was there. He'd sit at the table every night even if he was tired. I thought I could do the same, work hard and still be there. But somewhere along the way, I lost the balance." Sophia tilted her head, studying him with curiosity. "Did you miss him, too, when he worked?" Edward nodded, the memory bittersweet. "Sometimes. But he always made sure I knew I was more important than his job. I didn't do that for you, Sophia. And that's my biggest regret." She was quiet for a moment, her fingers twisting the loose strap of her backpack. Then she said softly, "I just wanted you to notice me. Not the gifts or the things, just me." Edward reached over, gently brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I notice you now. And I won't stop." The cab slowed again, passing a park where swings creaked in the wind. A few children laughed as they ran across the grass, parents close behind. Sophia's eyes lingered there, her voice wistful. "Do you think we could go to the park sometime? Just us?" Edward's throat tightened. He smiled through the ache. "Not sometime. Tomorrow. We'll go tomorrow." Her face lit with a small but genuine smile, the kind that carried trust. For Edward, it felt like the greatest deal he had ever sealed, not with contracts or signatures, but with a promise of time. The cab turned onto a narrow street lined with modest houses, each glowing with the soft light of evening routines. Curtains swayed in open windows, televisions flickered with family shows, and the faint aroma of dinners cooking drifted into the night air. Edward felt a pang of envy for the ordinary lives unfolding behind those doors, lives where presence mattered more than power. Sophia followed his gaze. "Do you ever wish things were normal?" she asked quietly. Edward exhaled slowly, his hand steady on the wheel. "More than you know. I thought giving you everything money could buy would make life better. But I see now, what you needed was me, not the things." She leaned back against the seat, thoughtful. "When kids at school ask about you, I don't know what to say. I don't want them to think you don't care. So I make up stories." The admission cut deep. Edward gripped the wheel tighter. "What kind of stories?" Her eyes lowered. "That we go fishing on weekends. Or watch movies after dinner. Or, that you taught me how to ride my bike." Her voice cracked on the last words, fragile and honest. Edward's chest ached. He wanted to reach back through time, to rewrite every missed evening, every broken promise. But the only time he had was now. "I can't change the past, Sophia," he said softly. "But I can change tomorrow. And every day after. We'll make those stories real, from now on." She studied him carefully, her face illuminated by the glow of a passing street lamp. There was doubt in her eyes, but also a flicker of hope, a fragile light he vowed to protect. The cab slowed as they approached their house, the familiar black iron gates looming into view. Normally, this return marked the end of his role as a father for the day, handing her over to nannies and routines while he disappeared into meetings. But tonight felt different. Tonight, he wasn't leaving her at the gates, he was walking in with her. The cab eased to a stop in front of the Blake residence, its towering gates casting long shadows across the driveway. The house loomed in the distance, grand and immaculate, but to Edward it looked more like a monument to absence than a home. He had built it to showcase success, yet within its walls had grown silence, distance, and unspoken longing. Sophia stared out the window, her face unreadable. Usually, this was the moment she would step out, greeted by staff who filled the spaces he should have occupied. Tonight, she lingered, her hand still resting on the rabbit poking from her backpack. Edward turned to her, his voice steady but gentle. "I don't want to just drop you off tonight, Sophia. I want to come inside. I want to spend time with you, really be here." Her eyes flick up in surprise. You mean, like dinner? He nodded. Yes. Dinner, stories, whatever you want. I don't want another night to slip by without us. For a moment, she searched his face, wary of disappointment. But the vulnerability in his expression softened her. Slowly, she nodded. Okay. Edward felt an unexpected relief wash over him, as if she had just opened a door he thought was locked forever. He guided the cab through the gates, parking near the grand staircase. The engine ticked as it cooled, its hum fading into silence. When they stepped inside, the house felt different. The marble floors gleamed as always, the chandeliers glowed brightly, but Edward saw it with new eyes. The vastness was hollow. What gave the space meaning wasn't the grandeur, it was the small figure beside him, her footsteps echoing softly as she led the way. In the dining room, staff began to move toward them out of habit, but Edward raised a hand. Not tonight. Tonight, it's just us. Sophia's face lit with a shy smile, one that seemed to say finally. And for the first time in years, Edward Blake sat at his own table not as a guest in his daughter's life, but as her father. The dining room, usually a stage for extravagant dinners and formal gatherings, felt strangely intimate with only 2 plates set on the long polished table. Edward had insisted the staff leave, and now he found himself awkwardly holding a serving spoon, fumbling as he tried to dish pasta onto Sophia's plate. She giggled, covering her mouth with her hand, the sound light and genuine. You're not very good at this, she teased. Edward chuckled, shaking his head. You're right. I've closed billion-dollar deals, but somehow this feels harder. Her laughter softened into a smile, and for a moment, the distance between them seemed to shrink. They ate slowly, talking between bites, about her classes, the book she was reading, the art project she wanted to finish. Edward listened intently, hanging on to every word as though they were rare treasures. When she spoke about her favorite story character, her eyes lit up with a spark he hadn't seen in years. Edward realized he had missed not just moments, but whole pieces of who his daughter was becoming. After dinner, Sophia cleared her throat, hesitating. Do you think, maybe you could read me a story tonight? Like, before bed. The request hit him harder than any boardroom negotiation. It was simple, yet monumental. A reminder of how many nights he had missed. His throat tightened as he nodded. Of course. I'd be honored. Later, in her room, she curled under the blankets, the stuffed rabbit tucked close. Edward sat beside her with a worn storybook, his voice steady but filled with emotion as he read aloud. Each word carried more than the tale on the page, it carried a promise, a bridge built over the years of distance. Sophia's eyes grew heavy, her breathing slowing as sleep tugged at her. Edward closed the book softly, watching her drift off. In that quiet moment, surrounded by crayons scattered on the desk and the faint hum of a nightlight, he felt something he hadn't known in years, peace. Edward lingered in the doorway long after Sophia had fallen asleep, her steady breaths filling the quiet room. The soft glow of the nightlight painted her face in a gentle light, and he felt a pang of both sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for the years he had lost, gratitude for the chance to make the rest of them count. He stepped into the hall, the silence of the house pressing around him. For the first time, it didn't feel like a palace, it felt like an echo chamber of all the moments he had missed. But tonight, that echo was broken by the memory of her laughter at dinner, her small voice asking for a bedtime story, her smile softening when he promised to show up. Edward walked into his study, a room lined with contracts, awards, and photographs that rarely featured him. He sat at the massive desk where countless deals had been signed, and for the first time, he pushed the papers aside. He pulled out a notepad and began to write, not numbers, not strategies, but a simple list. A list of promises. Soccer practice. School play. Park on Saturdays. Dinner at home 3 nights a week. The list grew, not from obligation, but from desire. Each line felt like a thread weaving him closer to the life he had nearly lost. As he set the pen down, Edward realized how strange it felt, strange, and freeing to plan for presence instead of profit. He rose, returning to Sophia's room one last time before retreating to his own. He whispered softly, though she couldn't hear, "No more imaginary dads. You'll never need one again." For the first time in decades, Edward didn't feel the restless urge to check his phone, his emails, or the markets. Instead, he felt the simple pull of belonging. And as he lay in bed that night, he wasn't thinking of towers of glass and steel, but of a small voice saying, "Just you, Dad." It was enough. More than enough. Morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen table where Edward sat, waiting with 2 plates of toast and a glass of orange juice. When Sophia padded in, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her surprise turned quickly into a smile. He smiled back, his heart light. For once, he wasn't rushing out the door or checking his phone. He was simply there. "Ready for school?" he asked. She nodded, sliding into her chair. "Only if you walk me this time." Edward chuckled softly. "Always." And with that single word, the future finally felt whole again.